Hi, my name's Chris. I'm one of the leaders of Grace Church Hilton. This is session 2 of Same Again. If you missed session 1, you can catch up on our website or any of our social media channels, so do that before watching this. Today we're looking at the question, what went wrong? In his iconic song, Louis Armstrong said he could see trees of green, skies of blue, friends shaking hands, children growing, and he described it as a wonderful world. I think he was describing the world we all want, rather than the world we actually have. The world described for us at the end of the Bible is similarly a wonderful world, as is the world described by Mark, in which Jesus dealt effectively with the evil that afflicts us. And when we turn to the start of the Bible, to the book of Genesis, we see a wonderful world there too. Our world was made by God and it was made good. And we still see much in the world that's good, don't we? You may have had the experience of looking at breathtaking scenery, or maybe you've received incredible kindness from someone. Both reveal to us a good and beautiful world. But the beauty has a dark side. We also see great pain and suffering in the world. The horrors of the Holocaust, the devastation of a tsunami, the indiscriminate affliction of cancer, the increasing death toll of a global pandemic. When we lie these realities of beauty and ugliness side by side, we're forced to ask the question, what went wrong? And the answer the Bible gives us is stark, uncomfortable, and maybe even surprising. All of this, it says, comes from the fact that humanity has rejected God. We want to be God of our own lives, and so we've ignored the true God. Let's look at the facts and the consequences of our rebellion against God. First, the reality of what we've done. We have spoiled the world we all want. It's sometimes said that people behave in a bad way because of the environment they were brought up in. And of course, upbringing is very important, but the Bible says that our problem is more fundamental than that. For some, it might be considered financial or other circumstances like that, but again, the Bible says our problem's far more fundamental than that. People often think that criminals are bad people, and most of us are fairly respectable. Not perfect, for sure, but more good than bad. But the Bible tells us that we're all affected. The story of Adam and Eve, the first man and woman, is our story. We've all rejected God, and that's the real problem and the real explanation for the world we live in. In a sense, Adam and Eve are Mr. and Mrs. Everybody. They are you and me, and what they did is what you and I do all the time. We want to be the masters and mistresses of our own world. We want to run our own lives. We want to be the ones to decide what's right and wrong for ourselves. The bottom line is that we think this is our world and that we are God. You see it in the tantrum of a toddler, in the surliness of an adolescent, or the repressed bitterness of an adult. In many different ways we react badly. We expect our own way because we labour under the illusion that this is my world. Well, why are we like this? Why are we so self-obsessed? The Bible gives a clear and uncompromising answer. We are like this because of what the first man and woman did. They are our ancestors. They are us and we are them. We are in them as they are our representatives. The world we now live in is not the world we want because each of us contributes to its brokenness. Well, think of it like this. If I've contributed to the brokenness, then this broken world is the world that I've chosen. I've helped to break it because I would rather have a broken world where I am God than the beautiful world where I live under God's rule. God's response to our rebellion is that this world is now cursed. We've spoiled the world we all want. The Bible account explains why the world contains both good things and bad things. Some years ago, a newspaper ran a series of articles entitled, "What's Wrong with the World?" Many people contributed with all sorts of ideas, but one writer replied in a letter. In answer to what's wrong with the world, he simply replied, "Dear sirs, I am. Yours truly, G.K. Chesterton." We've spoilt this good world that God made. I spoil it every day with my selfishness and thoughtlessness. Well, now let's look at the consequences of that rebellion, because it's truly awful. We have become God's enemies. Our problem is not just that we've spoilt the world, it's that we've become God's enemies. Our problem is not bad upbringing or bad karma. The Bible talks about it in very specific terms. We've become God's enemies. By disobeying him, turning our back on him, we have chosen to reject him. The Bible always speaks in these black and white terms. We're either his friends or we are his enemies. There's no neutrality. And it's very important that we see the human predicament in these terms. People often get turned off when we bring up the idea of sin, mainly because they think of it as rule breaking. And actually that's quite an attractive thing in some cultures, isn't it? Especially in the West. Rule breakers and rebels are seen as quite cool. But when the Bible refers to sin, it's most often in relational terms. Sin does involve breaking God's rules, but it's just as much about breaking a relationship. Imagine a grandmother who loves you and cares for you. Sin is like pushing her down the stairs because she doesn't give you your own way. That is what Adam and Eve did. They didn't just break a rule, they stabbed in the back the most gracious and loving person they could ever know. And we all do it. It's no wonder, is it, that we're called enemies of God. That's why we face his judgment. We face death, both physically and spiritually. Separation from the goodness and love of God. Instead of the world we all want, we get the world we deserve. A world of our own making, just like Adam and Eve did. Have you ever had someone tell you that you've disappointed them? It's a painful thing to hear, isn't it? But I suspect as many times as you've disappointed someone else, there are even more times that you've disappointed yourself. You want to be a better person, but you find yourself repeating the same mistakes. You're not the husband you want to be, the wife or the son or the daughter, the one you ought to be. You're not the person you ought to be because you are a rebel who rejects the God who made you. You have become God's enemy. We all have, and we must face the consequences. I know that's not a popular view of ourselves, and it's not a popular view of God, but I have to realise that I'm not as good as I think I am. I'm not as good as other people think I am. And I've also got to recognise that God is not some kind, cuddly old man who will smile indulgently but ignore everything I've done. God isn't like that. God is a loving, powerful creator to whom I'm answerable. And I've offended him by the way that I've treated him. Isn't it ironic then that the world we all want is very similar to the world God first made? Yet that's the world the human race fight to leave. We've rejected God's rule, stabbing him in the back, trampling his garden, ruining the wonderful world. Well, it would all be so depressing if we hadn't already heard how Jesus came to do something about that. As the Bible story moves towards its climax and resolution, we see that Jesus is at the centre of that. The hint of a resolution comes just after God's curse in Genesis 3 in a promise. He says, one day he will send a child born of a woman who will crush the serpent's head. Well, there's a lot more to happen before we get there, so that's for another session.